Hi, welcome to the channel. This is a review of the Tamron 18-400 lens 1 year on after I purchased it. In this video I will share my experiences of using the lens, some photographs, and also at the end of the video I'll give you my opinion about whether it was a good purchase or not. So, what's the background to all of this? Well, I purchased this lens just about a year ago now. I think it was June 2019. And I originally purchased it for a Nikon D5600. An F-mount camera. Since then I've upgraded to the Z50, which is a Z-mount camera, and also clearly to use that lens, the Tamron lens, I need the FTZ converter. So some of the images that you're going to see are native on an F-mount, the D5600, and others will be from the Z50. And there is a slight difference, I think, but basically the lens performs really well on both cameras. If you want to see the other two videos, and I've linked them below, but also up above I will link them as well, I've got the original Tamron review, but also a day out at a place called Wisley, RHS, Royal Horticultural Society, Wisley in the UK, on a very frosty day in early 2020 when I took the lens and the Z50 out for a trip around the gardens. So for those of you who've not seen the first video, let's have a quick recap of the specifications. This is the Tamron 18-400. And there are two different versions of it, one for Nikon and one for Canon. I'm reviewing the one for Nikon, but I understand the Canon performs more or less the same. However, because they are crop sensors, both the Canon and the Nikon, there is a magnification crop factor to apply. That effectively means that in the Canon there's a 1.6 times crop factor, which is a 28-640 lens equivalent, and in the Nikon it's a 1.5, which is roughly 25-600. And as you can see, from the sort of mid-20s to the 600-ish, that's an amazing zoom range for this lens, so it enables you to take photographs in many different situations. At the short end, at the 18mm, it's a 3.5 f, and up at round about the 400. Now there are some limitations with this, particularly as you get to with the amount of light that you need to get satisfactory. That gives us about a 22 times zoom factor from one end of the range to the other, which is really quite amazing in one lens. It also gives a magnification ratio of roughly 3, which means you can do some macro photography. You can't get in really close to really small things, but for things like flowers and insects, it does give you an element of macro photography. The front thread is 72 millimeters if you want to put a filter on it. I haven't got a filter on here, some people put UV filters. The lens itself ships with a lens hood. It ships with the lens protector at the back and of course the lens itself. There are 3 groups of switches on the back of the lens. One is a lock, so that when the lens is hanging vertically off your camera it doesn't unwind. There is then an autofocus and a manual focus switch, so that you can turn it off mechanically with the switch, the focusing. And lastly, there is a stabilization switch, vibration control, and you can just turn that on and off. So typically you turn the vibration control off if maybe you're on a tripod, but if you're on handheld, you typically want the vibration control on. The weight of the lens itself is just over 700 grams, and with the lens cap and also the lens hood, you're looking at just over 750 grams. The physical size of the lens wound in is about 15 centimeters, and then when fully wound out is about 24 centimeters. So what's the build quality like? Well, the majority of the lens is built out of plastic. Clearly there are some metal fittings, particularly this ring around here and the mechanism for attaching it to cameras. And this is of course the new styling of Tamron that they put in place a few years ago. There are some gaskets on the lens, which makes it moisture proof. I wouldn't say weather resistant. And also apparently there are some gaskets within the barrel as well as it expands and reduces. But of course, because of these bellow effects, it must be drawing air in and out of the lens. And so in a damp environment, it will be sucking in some air and indeed moisture. But having said all of that, it feels fairly chunky and it feels fairly well built and not flimsy at all. So what about using it? Well, often on the camera, it's holding itself up like that, and the lens doesn't tend to creep down unless it's already partly out. There is a loose part there. So if you feel it's getting jigged and possibly might unwind when you're carrying it around, there is the lock switch here where you can just lock it and it keeps it stable in position. As you wind out the lens to zoom it, there is some different levels of resistance. So it starts off moderately loose, but tight enough. It then stiffens up around about the 40 range and then eases up after about the 200. So as you're zooming, you just need to be aware of that. It is a smooth movement, it just becomes a little stiffer. The manual focus ring is just here, and when you've got it on autofocus, you will feel this rotate as the camera focuses, and you've got to be a little bit careful that you haven't got your fingers resting on here, that you can catch it. The other thing is this ring isn't loose, so when you're in autofocus move, you can't override it with a manual focus and just tweaking the focus slightly, and that is a little bit annoying. You can't just set it up to that precise amount of focus, but normally it gets its focus pretty spot on. The lens does have vibration control, and one of the switches here is to set the vibration control on or off, and it has 2.5 stops worth of vibration control. So effectively you can hold the lens still in the hand at a much slower speed, and I can typically get reasonably stable down to about the 20th, maybe a 15th of a second. So it really is very effective, far more than I could do with a handheld on my own without any vibration control. So what are the qualities of the pictures like? Well, as you can see from this wall test where we've got straight lines in the bricks, I've taken some photographs at 18mm, at 400mm, and you can see there is a little bit of distortion at 18mm, but really this is not terribly significant. And with modern software products like Lightroom, it's very easy to adjust these out within the software parameters. The colour and tone look good, the quality of the glass seems to produce good, pleasing sort of images, and the sweet spot for the focus is somewhere between the 40 and the 200mm range. If you roll towards the 18mm or indeed towards the 400mm, as you start to pixel peep, you can see it's not tack sharp focusing. But if you just take the image and print it up as sort of an A4 or even bigger, you're not really going to notice it's out of focus if your camera is focusing correctly. It really is very good. The images look good, you can get a reasonable degree of bokeh off them, and with the range of 18 to 400, you can use this lens in many different circumstances. So I haven't really used this lens very much for video. I tend to use other lenses for that, but I think a couple of things to say. The HLD motor within the lens is reasonably quiet. You don't tend to get too much noise spilling off into the video. And also you can get a reasonable level of bokeh. So it does work, it does reasonable results. And again, because of the phenomenal zoom range you've got on this lens, it's more than acceptable to use for the casual videoing. So where does this leave us? Well, today is June 2020. And I checked on Amazon, and the cost of this lens in the UK is about £600. So in dollars, I guess, that's probably around $650, something like that. And for that sort of price, I think it represents excellent value. Now, clearly, this lens is not as sharp, or it will not perform as well as some prime lens costing £1,500, $2,000 upwards. And they tend to be fixed focal length, but the quality of them will be much better, and they will work in much lower light settings. But then they're phenomenally more expensive. So you pay your money and takes your choice. It's got an excellent range of performance for the price. I would say it's not perfect at anything, but nevertheless it comes up with some really fantastic results. And for myself, I found it as an incredibly useful travel lens. So I'll take this with me wherever I happen to go on travelling, whether it be in the UK or abroad, when indeed you could travel abroad. And this one lens would go in my bag. I've got a lens that works in reasonably okay light conditions, and certainly the zooming on it takes care of most situations, and it enables me to get some fantastic photographs that I just wouldn't have otherwise been able to get without taking a whole bag full of lenses, and I certainly couldn't get those images on my smartphone. So if you haven't already bought this lens, should you buy it? Well, I've got to give you my impression, and for me, I've been thoroughly pleased with this lens. I think it was a very good purchase, very good value for money. So one of my other really good go-to lenses that I got a while back is my 35mm 1.8 prime lens, which I use in certain situations, particularly in lower light situations, maybe indoors, maybe parties, or when I want to take headshots or something like that. And of course now I've got a Z50. I did buy that with the two kit lenses, and the 18 to 55 Z little pancake lens on there is just amazing. It looks like a toy, but it comes up with some stunning photographs. and also the 70-200 Z-mount lens also is a very good lens, and it has very high performance and really good focus. So really, I've got several lenses that are really my go-to lenses now. I think my next lens might be a long-range prime. I'd love to get a 600mm when my budget allows, but for the time being, I'll make do with what I've got. So I hope you found this video useful. I hope it's given you something to think about, or maybe reinforced opinions that you've already got. But if you have found it useful, I'd really love you to like and subscribe, click that bell, and please leave some comments. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Goodbye.